I worked for ASOS once and had to fill out so many, just an unbelievable amount of forms, including the modern slavery policy.
Yeah.
And then they also gave me payment terms of 120 days, which I thought was
A couple of years ago, I did a weird contract where we were supplying gorse flowers to somewhere for some industrial process, and this it was a skincare thing, and they had to fill in all these sorts of forms, but it was soil association and then some cruelty-free thing and leaping bunny accreditation and stuff like that. So, do you mince up any dormice and put them into your ingredients, those kind of things. And there was one bit which she said, do you use slave labor? No. And it's like, are any animals harmed in the collection of this thing? So no, not as far as we know. But then you haven't asked whether any humans are harmed in the picking of this, because picking 5 kilos of gorse flowers involves being stabbed a lot and being the itchiest man in Christendom.
you don't know that. You haven't tested that you were the itchiest man there.
I'll fight anyone on that claim.
That must be something, actually be a trial sport in the Olympics to see which.
Itchiest man in Suffolk.
I'm not in
Oh, I
Suffolk.
think we put this global. I think we put this global. I mean, I'm covered in psoriasis courtesy of purging purging buckthorn and blackthorn, and I've sort of got it under control at the moment, which is quite bizarre. But I mean, I come out with all sorts of weird skin rashes. I'm sure
Has
that
anyone
girl
ever
who
thought you were, if you come in quite dishevelled after laying a hedge in the cold and have got all sores up your arms, anyone ever think,
Up your
if you come to
arms?
Harlow, they would have thought you might
Yeah, yeah.
be
I'll tell you a funny story about that. So every once in a while, when you apply for your
and I think the
shotgun.
technical term is an intravenous heroin user.
I was going to say hedge laying meth addict. Yeah.
Well, do you know, it wasn't that I was accused of that, but I had the lovely guy who used to be sadly retired now, who was one of our Suffolk's firearms officers, and he came around to go and make sure that my gun cabinet was secure and that I had all the things I was supposed to have and wear. And he was interviewing me, and one of the processes is when you get your firearms and shotgun certificate, is that they talk to you and make sure that you are of sound mind. And I could see his eyes kept straying down to my arms because he came in about August, sort of July, August, so it was sort of t-shirt weather. But I've still got these sort of very obvious marks on my arm, and I could see him, and he scribbled something down. And I'm not like Sherlock Holmes; I can't read upside down. But I saw him, and I thought, "Yeah, you're writing something." And I watched his eye line, and I thought, "You're looking at my arms." And I said, "Are you worried that I'm a self-harmer?" And he sort of looked a bit guilty and ashen faced. And I said, "You remember what I do for a living?" And he went, "What, remind me?" And I said, "I'm a hedge layer." And he went, "Oh, hedge layer." And I could suddenly see him then look down, and he scribbled out, which obviously had
Emo,
suspicious, yes, suspicious arms. So
goth,
I was allowed to keep all my guns. So that was a bonus. Oh,
colourful goth. You
can you imagine me as
just
a
coloured
goth?
out goth and just kept you as colourful.
Aging. Aging goth. Yes.
Former goth, possibly not over it. Maybe it was never a phase.
Still listens to Cure and Sisters of Mercy. Yes. Yeah. Any road. What are we talking about today?
I was about to say that.
Oh, sorry.
Well,
Let's
well,
cut that bit out.
well, no, that's fine. We'll leave it in. People don't want to know that we're competent and we know what we're doing. It would ruin the illusion. What have we done this week? Because we've missed a week because we had Leon on last week, and he was much more interesting than any of us put together. So, like, Callum, what have you done with your week?
This is going to be long. I have a very.
Can you try and keep it under an hour?
I'll keep it under an hour, but it's quite jam-packed. Quite a lot of stuff in a week, and we didn't get to talk about last week's
God.
stuff. But yeah, he loves this, doesn't he? I might just keep going. During the war,
Tell me what you did this week, Callum.
this week has been hectic. Started the week with a bit of fishing. Because it was a bit of a cold snap, so we had a bit of fishing, And the one thing I do when there's a bit of floodwater in the river and it's a bit colder is I turn my attention to the grayling that live in the River Lee. And amazingly, I had one bite all day, which I thought was a bleak because it was so small, and it was actually a teeny tiny little grayling, probably 4 or 5 inches in size. But yeah, I
Am I
done it.
right in saying, Callum, that grayling are one of the indicators of clean rivers? Is that right?
Yeah, they're usually not very hardy at all. So this bit of river runs. I don't want to give it away completely, but there's some chalk stream pieces of river that feed into this particular area. So
The Thames.
going it's not going to get the same pollution as further up the river because it's all fed by underground aquifers that are what are a chalk stream basically. So the river Mimram feeds into it, the river Bean, and a bunch of others all feed in from kind of Hertfordshire area.
They're not real names.
So the River Beam, the River
Bean,
Rimram, did you say?
Mimram.
Mimram, isn't that wonderful?
You're making that up, surely.
Yeah, something out of Tolkien. That's Lord of the Rings stuff.
A couple of years ago, the Mimram actually completely dried up, which I don't know if you know, but that's a
That's not a good thing for rivers.
ecological disaster, really, because once it dries up and the riverbed dries up, all of the area that the dragonflies lay all the eggs in and stuff like that, that gets when it dries up, it's lost everything. So it has to start that whole ecosystem again. And there's lots of species of dragonflies that only exist on the riverbeds of chalk streams. So I think it's like 90% of of the chalk streams in the world are in our part of the
UK.
world.
Yeah,
Mm.
So it's
yeah.
such an important ecosystem. And when they dry up due to, I don't know, building and all sorts of things that disrupt the aquifers and the water table, it destroys habitat and kills off lots of things like dragonflies and yeah,
And it can even
life like that.
just be somebody not thinking and just they want to drain off their bit of field, or it flooded a bit this year, so they're going to dig out a big channel and it knackers everything upstream of it as well as knackering their own bit because it just pulls all the water out, like the Chinese did with the Yangtze, and then dried up all those rivers in Vietnam.
Yeah, it happens. There's quite a lot of that.
I've only ever been fishing for grayling twice, and ridiculously in one of the both in the most salubrious of circumstances on the River Tweed on the Dryborough beat, which is if you were fishing for salmon on there, it would be considered frightfully grand, and you'd have to sell a kidney if you're as poor as me to go and fish on there. But there used to be when I lived up in Scotland, there was every year the Scottish fly fishing team used to have an invitational where they would go and get for this grayling competition. And grayling on a lot of the salmon rivers were considered as vermin because they eat salmon eggs. So
Yeah.
Mm.
therefore they sort of caught them and knocked them on the head. And then up there they sort of went, and perhaps we shouldn't be doing this. And we were, I mean, it's a weird old thing. You're using 3 Czech nymphs that you're sort of putting through and trolling them down and whatnot. And it's
Some
bloody
very
scary. Really is.
complicated techniques for grayling.
And I have to say, I was watching these absolutely expert fly fishermen catching things, and they're measured rather than weighed to see what they are. And you fish in pairs, and you sort of show your partner what you've caught. And there's the issue with this official measuring stick, and off they then go. And they were all off the scale. These things, they were, I don't know what the weight would be. You're talking probably sort of 2 pound plus
Yeah,
grayling,
big ones.
and they were
Lovely.
absolutely superb because, of course, no one ever fishes for them other than this brief window when the Tweed Rivers Authority lets this small select band go fishing on these famous salmon fishing beats for grayling. And it was superb to go and have this opportunity. I have to say, both times I was invited, I didn't catch a bean, but I enjoyed watching all the people who knew far more than I did doing it.
For people that don't know, the grayling is possibly one of the most beautiful fish you'll ever see. This like painting like sail of a fin, silvery body with like little odd colours of purple and pink bits down the flank.
Lady of the river, isn't it, that people call it? Or the lady of the stream, maybe?
Lady of
Lady
the
of the
stream.
Stream.
That's
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
yeah. Because people used to think that if you had grayling, you wouldn't get trout, wasn't it? The
Mm.
grayling outcompeted the trout, and you wouldn't. So they were almost persecuted as a nuisance fish for people who preferred trout to be in the river.
Oh, totally. It's one of those old school things that they eat eggs of fish. So clearly they will be eating so many eggs that we won't have trout and we won't have salmon, which is why this competition on the Tweed originally started, was because it enabled people to go and basically catch grayling and then knock them on the head, and they threw them on the side because apparently they don't taste very good, but they are beautiful, aren't they? I can't say from first-hand experience, but yeah.
There's a guy on Instagram that recently cooked a grayling, and he's on a mission to cook every single fish. And one of them he got to the other day was actually neon tetras, which I think caused quite a raucous. But the grayling was
Did he get it
went a
straight
bit.
from the shop, or?
I guess so. I mean, I don't know where he'd sourced them from, but yeah, he's on a mission to cook every single fish. He's quite an interesting character, really.
Wow.
My mate Gaz, who decided to become an archaeologist, a field archaeologist, because he worked out that was a job where he could travel all over the place, live in a field, and never earn enough to pay back his student loan.
Yeah.
He
Wow,
cooked grayling for me on the exhaust manifold of his transit van in
that is
foil.
glamorous.
We just drove around Bristol for a while cooking grayling in foil. It is a known technique, apparently, exhaust manifold cooking.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that.
I knew a woman who was actually an archaeologist, and her career's in ruins. You can have that one.
Do we want it? No.
You can cut it if you want.
Amy will edit that out.
No,
That's just
I
terrible.
don't mind.
I think we should keep it in so everyone knows what we have to put up with.
Let's keep this rolling because we're punchy and we're big in Korea. Go.
Sure.
South Korea, not North Korea. We don't have the
South
the
Korea.
stats for Kim Jong Un.
Yes, but I like to
I
think.
reckon Kim loves it.
I reckon he does. I reckon what he does, he sneaks it in. He's got his own special little box. What's it called? That Wi-Fi box, and he probably goes in. Go, yeah. I just imagine him sitting there chuckling away because he's got quite a chuckly face. You know, for a potential.
Looks like he loves a laugh, Kim.
He does, doesn't he? I mean, you might think, what's he going to do? What's his call going to be? Am I going to use anti-aircraft guns to blow away my opposition, or am I going to chuckle away at these three idiots talking about grayling?
Maybe it's up to us to keep him pretty chill.
Yeah, I reckon he would be. I reckon if he can, do you know? I'll see. I'll get my people to speak to his people. We've had Leon, we've had Harry, we've got another really exciting guest coming on next week. Kim Jong.
Kim,
Imagine if I could.
we know you're listening.
Yes,
Come on
Kim,
the pod.
would you like to come on? Would you like to come on? Because I reckon, can you imagine? I mean, he's got literally, I mean, that must be the greenest country and flipping in the world. Because
Has he got any curlews?
He's got low emissions, hasn't he?
very low emissions. I bet he's got loads of curlews. I bet his lapwing numbers and grey partridge numbers are through the roof. You know, if you went there, perhaps I could do, actually, for the big grey partridge count, I could go to North Korea. I could go there. I'm sure they'd welcome me with open arms.
North Korean hedge laying.
Do you think if you actually went, if I bang my feet in this, we ought to do this because you've said that we're apparently one of the reasons why we want money, right, for this podcast, so we can do outside broadcasts. I reckon an outside broadcast of me going in to the North Korean embassy in London and saying, what are the hedge laying opportunities in your country? I'm very interested in grey partridge conservation. How's about it? And if they went and said, I'll send one of their little people off, and they came back and they said, are you the guy from that podcast? The glorious leader reckons you're fantastic. And next thing you know, I am the official hedge layer to the glorious leader. Oh, I could dine out on that. I better get loads of medals. We probably won't be very big in America anymore, but there we go. Anyway, what else did you do interesting other than catching grayling? Callum, come on.
So, shot the shooting times cover. That's pretty cool. Always nice to get a cover. It's just a dog
Hold
running
on,
to
listen.
camera.
I've got the shooting times here in my hand. For authenticity, this is me opening it up because I haven't bothered to yet. I'm going to have a look and I'm going to do an
This is
instant review on
live.
it.
Is it?
Is that Simon Reinhold?
It's not that one then.
Oh,
Oh no, who's that on there?
that
That's
looks like
not.
Simon Reinhold to me.
So hang on. How
Hold
out of
on.
date is your celebration here,
This week's
Callum?
cover image was supplied by Sarah Farnsworth.
Oh,
Now, I'm not being funny. You're a Walt. You're a Walt, Callum. You did not get the shooting title. It's Sarah
Oh,
Farnsworth who's done that. I thought I recognised his face. I'm shooting with him on Friday, actually, out of interest.
so did you get? So I got last week's cover shooting
Yeah.
times.
which when you listen to this, dear listener, won't be this week's
No, that'll be
either.
the week
So
before's.
if
Yeah.
you apply to the shooting times, I think you can get back issues, and somewhere in there is at least one cover that Callum's got.
I think
Yeah.
I've done pretty well this year. I'm not sure what the
Maybe
number
this
is,
year.
but
It's only the end of
No,
January.
he is the
oh, well,
front
so
cover
far I got
king.
50%. Then it's me and Farnsworth blow for blow.
Right. I mean, is
Oh,
that something for photographers? I mean, when I used to write for the shooting times, I'd pen an article and think that is absolutely mint. I have used every single little trick in the book to write the perfect article. There's humor, there's a bit of pathos, there's a bit of tear in eye, and there's lots and lots of, you know, the sheen on teal's wing on it. And I put it in, and I'd say, bloody Simon Garnham once again has got the feature article. How dare he? I mean, we don't get paid any more for feature article compared with just one out with the washing, in the back of the thing. But do you get a bit of a frizz on of excitement when you get that front cover? Is that the thing you're after?
Yeah, the cover's like, the cover's like your image is what's going to sell the issue. So that's always like, that's a puff up if ever I've seen one. But really, like when you get a nice double page spread as well. So they've used your photo across 2 pages, and the double page spread on the one where I did shoot the cover with
Yes, the wild fowling one. Yeah,
the
it was
wild
lovely.
fowling.
Yeah.
Just a really cool shot that sums up that what wild fowling on the foreshore is actually
Mm,
like. The
mm.
tide coming in and lapping at your waders as you wait for it to potentially
Kill you.
drown you before you head
Yeah.
off. So yeah,
Do you know, I think I've said it before, but it's one of the things that I think that, you know, I've written huge amounts. In fact, I've now got I actually threw all my old copies of the Shooting Times away because I thought, well, I'm not going to write for them anymore. So therefore, I'm going to cut out every article that I've written for them for the 7 years that I did. And I've got an entire sort of like old school folder, lever arch file, stuffed with my articles. And I was going back through all those things, and it was quite poignant because you see these things you've written about. But do you know, I look at some of the photography that you did, and I think, wow, that is so beautiful and so crafted. Yet at the end of the day, BB and hopefully me will be remembered as writing about these things. But no one actually really remembers. Everyone waxes lyrical about Peter Scott's artwork, but the photographer is an unrecognized, unregarded, and forgotten hero of this genre. I think of writing about wild sport. I'm not talking about just the pillocks who can go and write something of yet another bloke pointing his gun skywards at a hedge chicken. I'm talking about that wild places stuff when you get people who are out sort of walking up something up a snowy hill or out on the foreshore. That's quite phenomenal how you captured that.
funny you should say that.
Go.
I had a chap called Ralph speak to me on the shoot I did on Saturday, and he said my image that I took of on one of his days for Fenland, a thing for Basque, made it to the Basque magazine, and
Yeah.
obviously they'd all had a chat about it, and he said that he always looks at the Shooting Times or one of the other magazines and looks at my name, and he thinks my images are fantastic. He's the first person to ever even notice that tiny little name. He said,
Yeah.
"Yeah." I said, "You're the first person." I said, "You're the first person to ever notice." He said, "Yeah, I'm forever turning the page sideways and reading who it is," which I thought was quite touching
Oh,
to
that's nice.
have my first person to ever recognise any of it.
You're a celeb.
So you've shot a front cover fictitiously and caught a tiny grayling. What else have you done?
S My last thing is, I got in a lot of trouble. I mean, I'm lucky not to still be in the doghouse right now.
You are recording from the same house, so at least we know some ending of
Um,
this.
yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that we have children together, it might have
Dear,
been
that bad.
pretty bad. No, it was really bad. It was really bad. I'd say like a full 7 out of 10. I mean, shy of
Ooh.
having an affair. Uh,
You sort of frame this one and put it on the wall for later.
yeah, I still feel bad about it now. So yeah, um, I it sounds very trivial, but I promised that I'd be back at 1 p.m. So I was allowed out of the house for a sort of 36 hours of chaos, which was a driven day, followed by a late afternoon of wildfowling, uh, sleep somewhere, and then get up and go deer stalking. So, the holy trinity of January. Only I'm not sure. I don't know how much deer stalking you guys have ever done, but when you shoot two red deer that are like 100 kilos each, there is a lot of admin. And to get in and get out and be home for 1 p.m. to go bowling with the family, it wasn't going to happen.
Ooh, yeah.
So there I am with a 100 kilo deer in what I can only describe as a swamp, with a with and there's a ditch around the outside. So we had to get a deer through a ditch full of water, which was deeper than wellies, then over a fence which had barbed wire on it, then into the car, do the gralloch, get it back to the chiller, skin it, cut it into 4 quarters. A lot of admin. Found
This
myself
explains it.
covered in blood at about 2:30, an hour away from home.
This
Um,
explains it. You sent both Richard and I a
Hmm.
WhatsApp photograph of you with that silly jacket of yours that looks like you've skinned bungle, giving a thumbs up, and it looks like you've either been involved in a fist fight with said bungle or you have cut yourself. So basically that was where you were going and dragging this deer carcass around about the place.
yeah, and I've still got actual
Oh,
red
he's
marks from pulling
obviously
the skin off of a deer, which
in
was great
in
fun.
podcast world you can't see, but
Yeah,
what Callum's just shown us on the camera is a what we call in the real world a callus. So that's good news. Yes,
Callum's
you know, a
callus.
callus, Callum's callus. Oh, that sounds like something out of a sort of 1980s children's TV program. It's Callum's callus. Yeah,
It did look a bit like an extra from or an excerpt from a sequel to Essex Boys. It looks like he just dumped a body out of the
yeah,
back of a Range Rover on some unlit lane.
yeah,
It was not far from that. And what I will say is anyone that's actually like, I'm going to say this, really important job to do to shoot these reds. They have absolutely destroyed this area. There is no, like, 6 foot up. There is no bark left on any of the trees there.
it's quite interesting that the East Anglian herd had more or less died out, but they come from a sort of two sources because in Suffolk, most of them come and they live in Euston Bigwood and they have very set routes they go through. But they reckon that a lot of the reds that came here are some are escapees uh, from deer parks, but some of them, quite interestingly, were when they stopped something called carted stag hunting. So basically, what they used to do before they did drag hunting, they used to have a tame stag, and they would cut his antlers off, and he was treated like one of the ponies in the paddock. And they would take him on a cart or in a horse box. And there used to be these things called the Norwich Staghounds. And they would go and release him somewhere and give him fair law. And the hounds would then go "Woo," and go chasing after him. And he would lead them on a merry dance. And eventually, stags, when you hunt a stag, he goes to bay. He said, I've had enough of running away. And he sort of turns around and he goes, "Wah, come on then, have a go if you think you're hard enough." And with the stag hound packs on the Quantox or Exmoor, they would then go and shoot him. Well, back in the old days, they'd jump on his back and cut his throat, but then they'd shoot him in the head. And that's how they hunted stags down on the
Sounds
southwest. Not with a
sounds
carted
pretty
stag. What they would do is
barbaric.
they'd call the hounds off and they would get like a sort of couple of hurdles and push him back onto to the cart. And there he was going, I'm a bit knackered now. And they would take him back home, chuck him back out in the paddock, and that was his job. And when they banned this sport, the guy who owned the Norwich Staghounds, by all accounts, went, oh, what am I going to do with these stags I've got who are all stood out in the in the paddock? And he released them, and stags being stags sort of went out and they found a remnant couple of hinds somewhere, and hey presto, we have got in East Anglia. I mean, if you've ever shot an upland sort of the monarch of the glen, the monarch of the glen is like a Shetland pony compared with East Anglian reds. Like Callum was saying, 100 kilos. Yeah, that'll be it. They're like a cow.
Oh, it's unreal the size of them.
Yeah,
You
massive.
just want you never get that close, so you never
No,
see quite how big they are.
they are superb. One of the things I would say is that you're quite right. Is that reds and roe need culling, but with very attention to detail. Is that because they belong here just as much as you and I do? We can obviously eradicate muntjac, Chinese water deer, and fallow, and no one would miss them ever, other than weirdos. But I think it's something that the reds do belong here, and yes, how they've come, that they've arrived back here, the reds, in rather weird ways, but God, they belong here, and they're magnificent creatures. But they do make a hell of a mess. But you have to cull them, but you don't need to eradicate them. Management is the key.
They do their teeth on the bark, and they try and rub their antlers
Yeah,
up the trees, which just introduces infection to the trees and just destroys them. I didn't realize quite how damaging they are. It's interesting that all the different deer do completely different damage. Well, not completely different, but they've all got their, if it was
foibles.
if it was
Yeah.
top trumps, they'd all have a different level
In
in
woodland, I don't know what it's like with you, Richard, up in Wales, but here is that our pet hate in Forester's World is the fallow, closely followed by the muntjac, because muntjac are eating out the regen, fallow go in herds and they just smash everything up. You won't hear many forestry guys going bloody reds or bloody row. They won't do that. It's the foreigners, it's the non-natives who are doing it. And I guess it's because their activities just don't belong here. They are incompatible with what we do. And it's a very strange thing because it's one of the few things, deer management, where actually we largely have, certainly lowland deer management, we there's not a lot actually of difference between what George Monbiot would say and what I would say, is that these things need color. Even Chris Packham, Chris Packham said we need to control these. Yeah, his weird idea is to release lynx, which is obviously a batshit mental idea, but because a 243 can do a lot more than what a lynx can ever do. But that's very interesting. So, do you want to know what I did?
We may as well.
I laid hedges.
Is that mostly it?
Yeah, more or less. I mean,
Yeah.
it's Groundhog Day. It's this time of year. But what I did do, very briefly, is I thought, I was very conscious of the fact that, I have tens of thousands of people who follow me on X. Have to call it X now because Elon may sponsor us. Who knows? What I decided to do each day, because I thought, actually, I was starting to read my Twitter feed and I thought, I'm getting a bit toxic on here because, as listeners may have gleaned, I'm not that enamored by our current government because of the things that they've done to farming and those of us who rely upon farming for our employ. Um,
Bingo cards at the ready.
so therefore, what I thought, I'm going to actually start interjecting just a brief snapshot of what I see from when we sit at the end of the day on the back of the tailgate of my truck. So Goldie goes trundling off in his thing, and I just sit there and I let Blythe, my youngest spaniel, have a quick run around. And I thought, what have I seen today? And I put that down, and I wrote about how we saw this beautiful little blob of 40 lapwings come over us, and I wrote something poetic about them, and then the next day I talked about the long-tailed tits that came down and observed us, or while we were doing it, and jump in the brash, and they sort of tweet at you, and I sort of said that they always appear to sort of slightly they look a bit smug. Long-tailed tits, they're sort of looking at, didn't like you very much, and you haven't done that very well, and then they sort of go off as if they're all laughing because they're a bit angry. And then I wrote a bit of poetry from Charles Hamilton Sawley, who was one of the less well-known First World War poets, about what he wrote about rooks, because rooks are always with us. And then I wrote a bit about a kestrel, who is quite funny. Every single day he used to come down and watch us. You could see him watching us quite happily, and he didn't bother hovering about, and he just used the electricity cables, and you can almost see him warming his feet, and you think, well, I must get warm feet while I'm waiting for a volt to come on. And I wrote about this each day, and what was rather reassuring was that I can write something quite ranty about politics or this, that, and the other. But actually, when I wrote on X about these 4 different birds that I'd seen from my privileged location of sitting in this middle, this wide expanses of Norfolk where I've been laying this hedge, and that was my most popular things that I wrote, which was a good reminder to me, is that if you are privileged to work on the land and amongst wildlife, and whether you're a farmer in a tractor, or whether you're a hedge layer doing something as cuddly as hedge laying and trying to to refurbish habitats, that if you actually tell people what you've done and about the wildlife that you've seen, is that there is still a greater interest in that, you saying Rachel Reeves is a dickhead. So that's a great thing, is that actually people would much rather hear you talking about lapwings than they would about Rachel Reeves. So I learned a lesson this week. That's what
Yeah.
I've done.
You also taught me what a pollard oak tree was.
Oh, I did, didn't I? Yes, the
Hmm.
pollard oak. Yeah,
Thank you for
yeah.
that. Didn't know
You're
that.
welcome. Yeah,
Didn't know
yeah,
that that was how that worked.
yeah.
So you
Mm.
blame the French for many things, but pollarding is a wonderful thing that they brought across.
You can also
Uh,
blame for Soissons Neuf.
You might
mm.
as well quickly explain what pollard oak tree is. As I'm a noob, you might as well.
Okay, pollard oaks. So, particularly in arable settings, they were quite normal. That what you would do is you'd have a hedgerow tree. So you'd have, and we'll use it in hedgerow settings rather than just in general. And what you do, you got a tree growing up, so you would cut the major limbs, the branches off, and you'd cut them back, and that served a number of functions. If you look at most of uh, the paintings of agricultural scenes, particularly those by Constable, you'll see most of the trees there seem to have massive trunks and funny little spindly limbs. And the reason being is because the working class rural people cut the limbs off them, so it reduced shade on the field. The landlord owned the trunk, the peasants owned the limbs. So that was their firewood, what they cooked on, and it reduced shade from so therefore you had better crops growing, and that's why you have these great big thick trunked trees but relatively spindly tops, and you can still see them very much now across many landscapes, but particularly in our arable landscapes. And if you say look at the works of John Constable, and
Mm.
that will show you what pollard trees are.
You also see it in antiques because pollarded oak wood was used for veneers. Pollarded oak is a sort of a category of veneer wood, but you see it a lot in certain antiques from the mid 19th century onwards, because I think it was when the machines came in that meant you could get the veneer from it. So a lot of those pollarded oaks were then felled for the high value veneer.
Maybe it's the Essex in me, but when you said veneer, I just thought, oak on your teeth. That seems
Well, it's like
strange.
Turkish teeth. You get Turkey oak, but Turkish teeth. Yeah.
The Dale Vance of trees. Yeah.
Oh well,
So
this is the
Richard, we're going to ask you, because I mean, look, we did have a plan today that we were going to talk about something else, but I think that what we have done this week is all largely fascinating, particularly the grayling in the suburban rivers that Callum goes in. So come on, give us something
all right.
exciting and violent that you've done, Richard.
Exciting and violent. A lot of sitting in the office because I've actually realised it's the end of January and I haven't really done
Ugh.
any proper work this year yet, and I do need to pay some bills.
What was exciting and violent about that?
Well, nothing.
Rachel
Nothing.
Reeves's tax policies. That's what it was.
Yeah, that's
Violent.
it.
Mm.
And as well, actually, I've turned my camera off now, so you can't see. But due to the unique way our country is funded, I'm wearing 3 coats sat inside. But we're doing lots of. It's weird. Spring is arriving early this year. And we've had quite a few frosts and snow already since Christmas, but it just feels warm when it's not frosty. It gets above 7 degrees, and it feels like stuff's growing under your feet. And I keep seeing bits of hawthorn and coming out, and so it feels like we're on for an early spring, which means people are starting to get in touch with me about foraging and wild food stuff. So I've been talking to different people about, well, we could run a course there in August and run a course here and there. So due to both of my co-hosts here, we've ended up with a contact, which I'm not going to say it out now because we haven't sorted it out yet, but they know who they are. And it was lovely to speak to them last night. We're going to sort something out to do some foraging wild food courses in Suffolk in
In
the
North
summer.
Korea. Oh,
Yeah, well, North Korea is your Norfolk, isn't it?
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, yeah. It's the
loads of red deer there.
yeah. So we're going there, and then there's some stuff in the Midlands, and we've got some stuff down in Cornwall, which means I'm probably going to be spending most of my summer driving up and down the M6 or the A14, which is not terrible. So we've got
Is that Wales?
no, it's not. I always know I'm on the A14 because there's always a dead muntjac by the side of the road.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually. Is if you think about roadkill, is that there was a load of hoo-ha about, oh, look at the number of pheasants that are along the side of roads. Oh, look at that! It's the only reason there's lots of crows and magpies is because of pheasants. Well, actually, if you do drive along any East Anglian road, the A14, A140,
Mm.
A143, the whole place, if you get very far east, the side of the road is listed with Chinese water deer. If you go a little bit further inland, it's muntjac, and that's about it. And lots of badgers. There's no bloody pheasants at all.
So this is the weird thing we don't get. We don't really have deer in North Wales. I mean, there's a few
What
at
at
the
all?
there's a
Nothing.
few in the Elwy Valley, which is on the near St Asaph on the north coast and sort of around the Kimmel Estate and places like that. And there's a bit in Mid Wales, and there's a little bit over on the very far edges of Snowdonia. But I could walk around in big circles all the way across this county and never see a deer, never see deer sign, never see a print. If I saw a deer on any of the bits that I shoot on or that we manage, I would be gobsmacked because we just don't have them. And then when you go over the border, they suddenly become a plague. It's weird how they don't come over.
In our region, we have a severe issue with our efforts to go in and preserve, maintain, manage, increase habitat, because we have an overabundance of certain deer species. largely the ones that don't even belong here because they were released by the Duke of Bedford and his pals, 100+ years ago. And so therefore we are utterly ruthless on them.
He released a lot of stuff, didn't he? The old Duke
Yeah,
of
he
Bedford.
did.
Yeah,
What he used to do, when you go to a dinner party round a friend's house, and if it's a bit
Not
sort
anymore.
of,
I don't.
well, no, obviously not now, since the great incident, but as we will
That's what I'm
now,
going to refer to it as.
the great
Um,
incident. But what
only
if you go to a sort of slightly smart do, you might actually go to the top shelf of the wine rack in your local co-op and get one of the French ones. And so therefore, if he was going to a slightly smart do, he would take a brace of muntjac and he'd say, look, I've got these frightfully interesting little Chinese deer here, you can have some of these. And they'd go, thank you very much, and they put them in their deer park. If he went to sort of a slightly
alive.
someone,
I thought you meant
oh
like
yeah, no,
dead.
alive, so
All
they
right.
could go and put them out. A couple of brace of them. He'd have his man go and sort of bring them. If you look in your loose box in your stables, you'll see these things. They're called Reeves Muntjac deer. Frightfully interesting. I've got them in the
Yeah.
park back at Woburn. If he's going around to one of his sort of slightly people he wasn't trying to impress quite so much, he'd go and say, I've got these delightful squirrels. They're from America. They're called grey squirrels, and
mm.
they'll make an absolute wonderful addition to your woods there. And they go, thank you very much. And so rather than going and taking either an expensive bottle of plonk, from the top shelf in co-op, or one of the ones that's got that convict on, which you only give to the people you don't like.
Oh, don't.
And that was it because it called 12 convicts. It
No.
tastes like jam, liquid
Don't
jam.
don't even take them. I'd be
Yeah.
so happy if you took them off the sponsor list, even for now. There's not
Oh,
there's not an amount of
yes.
money. It's
Yeah.
it's
You don't want to
rancid.
drink liquid jam, do you? No, it's
19
disgusting.
crimes.
19 crimes. Yeah, I'll tell you what the 19 crimes are, was they made that wine. Bloody Australians. I hope we beat them in the Ashes. But anyway, back to the point. So what he would do, he would give a bottle of 19 crimes, which was basically some grey squirrels. So, I mean, it's very easy to blame the Duke of Bedford. It's quite interesting because if you look at the sort of anti-big landowner mob, the sort of right to roamist type thing, they point the finger at the current Duke of Bedford and his ilk. The fact that they did this thing then, as if, well, clearly he was basically an ecological Pol Pot. Well, I mean, we all did weird things. I mean, but by God, I mean, they just the next door but one village to me, Wickham Skeeth. They dunked 12 witches and killed them under Matthew Hopkins. Apparently, it's the most witch-filled place. We all did weird things back then just because we thought that was the right thing to do. So if we are going to turn this into the accidental deer episode, which I think is now a good idea, I am intrigued because you have Richard Prideaux, you have a much better handle on what Joe Public thinks about eating deer, etc. Why are they quite happy to eat deer? Why?
I think it's because they haven't got the Bambi reference. I don't think sort of flies anymore. We were joking about this last week with Leon, but I don't think that's been a cultural reference for people for a while now, and they're more likely to have come across the term venison. And they know venison, deer means venison. Venison is good. Venison is a luxury meat, and that it's also the health benefits. I think the Americans have a say in this as well. I think the combination of meat eater and elk hunting and white-tailed deer hunting and stuff like that, plus Joe Rogan, and then the messaging about is mirrored here a little bit. People want deer, but then there's also there's a lot of these courses you can do, and we've run these sort of things with partners before, sort of deer in a day type courses where you start off with in a woodland with a carcass hanging from a tree and you finish up with a meal because you can go straight
That
from
sounds amazing.
butchery to cooking. Yeah, there are a few others that do shooting in them as part of that as well. So you shoot at a steel target and then you get a deer carcass and then you butcher it and then you cook a meal. It's about as primal as it gets.
If you run a course near me, I'm genuine. I'm buzzing to
Well,
do it,
you did that and nearly got divorced, surely.
and I'd do it again. Just to tell her.
So
Hope she
that's
don't
an
listen.
interesting thing. So what you do is that obviously because you can't just let random newbies just bimble about even under your tutelage with a rifle. So you
Mm.
go out, you shoot a target
Mhm.
that looks like a deer, and then you've got the carcass hanging up, and what you go from Gralach all the way through, or do you show them guts and all?
So when I've done it, we've done it ourselves, but there's other companies that do it better, to be honest, or they say they do more of it. The Always the problem with anything that's a wild food experience on the day is if people are paying to be there, you can't draw a blank, or you can't overrun, or you can't have, oh well, that one didn't work out, or there's some weird stuff on this one's liver, we're not going to eat it. So you have to break down the activities into predictable parts. So if you've got shooting, you've got butchery, you've got cooking, that means shooting has to be legal and safe and take place in an appropriate environment with appropriate instruction. And if it's a group setting, you can't all go on the same stalk. So that's that knackered straight away. Then the butchery part, well, that has to be safe, and you're producing food, and you have to do it in a way that means no one's going to stab themselves in the hand with a brand new Mora knife or something. So it has to be done in a planned way, and it has to be food safe, and everyone's going to be wearing aprons and gloves and stuff like that because you are producing food, but you're often doing it in a forest clearing environment. Well, you're a commercial provider then, which
Yeah,
adds a
of course.
layer on,
I hadn't even. I'm
which is
used to being
different.
in the field, literally,
Yeah.
like, you know.
So the butchery we do for ourselves.
Don't get me wrong, I wear gloves. This is kind of a pretty standard thing to do.
Well, it makes cleanup easier as well. I mean, actually, the same stuff I used to use for when I was doing medical stuff and emergency medical stuff in the middle of nowhere, I use the same principle for doing carcass butchery. I wear 2 layers of gloves because it means that if you've got blood on the outer layer of gloves, you can rip a layer off and you've still got gloves on, and you can go and touch something
Hygienically
clean.
use
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah.
And then cooking, again, the moment you're cooking for a group in the woods that are paying to be there, you've got to think about food hygiene certificate. You might get an environmental health inspection. We've had those spot environmental health inspections for cooking in the woods. You hit
No
this whole
way.
world you wouldn't think of, and it gets complicated. So you end up just breaking it down into separate activities that you can plan for.
That venison term that encompasses all species of deer.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's really not great. So Monkjack seems to be my favourite. I think I've had, I have had every one. Monkjack definitely my favourite. Chinese water deer also pretty nice. Reds, when I've had them in restaurants, really, really good. I haven't had much experience with reds.
Mm.
And roe deer, the spinal structure is different to almost every other deer. And or so regardless of the size of the animal, the is it the loin or the back bit is uniform in shape regardless of the size of the animal. So you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to get the same cooking time, whether you shoot one that's X kilo to X kilo. Big one, little one, small one, they're almost always exactly the same size. So chefs love them.
Yeah, medallions, isn't it?
And roe deer are delicious as well. But that calling, if you get an old, like an old red that's full of testosterone that's been hanging out a while, and that's your first taste of venison, you're probably going to be like, nah, I don't like venison. But then you have a nice monkjack haunch, barbecued, butterflied. It is
Mm.
delightful.
Mm.
I suppose that's something that was that Leon was very much on, was that it's about the provenance and the fact you name it. I asked the butcher about whether we should actually start naming, because he had some lamb that came in from one of the local relatively small sheep farmers. Not that he was small, as in 4'2", more that they don't farm on a large scale.
A hobbit.
Um,
Holding
and
a holding a banana for scale.
Yes, exactly. And they had purebred Suffolk sheep. And I said, surely you should be saying that this is Suffolk, because, people can say, oh, this is Aberdeen Angus, or this is,
Yeah.
Rigget, or that sort of stuff. And it's only
Salt
went, oh, I never
marsh
even thought
that
about it.
gets.
Yeah, exactly. Salt marsh, Romney Marsh sheep, and blah, 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 blah. It's interesting. And I think that one of the things that we got a lot of feedback courtesy of Leon's thing, and we got a lot of feedback courtesy of Harry's
Mm.
podcast he did was about trees, is that when you get these experts on, you get this absolute fantastic knowledge. But one of the things that they perhaps miss is because they're so close to the subject, is that you've just said there, Callum, is that why the hell aren't we actually saying this is muntjac, this is fallow, this is roe, that we aren't perhaps very good at at marketing that. And it's a niche product, venison, and perhaps we should be going and telling people more and telling the story behind it, or like Richard's just done in his courses.
You see it with beef as well, because you get sort of this is an Angus, this is a red, this is a
Mm,
red Devon. You see it in the menu, you see it on the back of the vacuum sealed packet. There's a big thing made about the particular breed. So yeah, you're right.
mm.
Why don't we do it with deer? Because
Well, I
species
mean,
to species, it's very, very different.
yeah, it makes a huge difference, as Callum said. So, I mean, is it right? This is the joys of the Countryside podcast. So I just said
Plodcast.
Countryside Plodcast. Right, I've only had one whiskey. So the Country Slide podcast is that we were supposed to talk about laybys and dogging, wasn't it, Richard?
It was something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's go with
And
that.
we
Yeah.
ended up talking about deer all the time. But you see, I think that I'd much rather talk about grayling and deer, because I mean I love deer. They are fascinating. Do you know my village, a lot of Suffolk, I don't know if it's the same in other places, but Suffolk and South Norfolk, nearly every village will have a sign. So rather than just saying, "This is my village," it has quite an elaborate shield. And on that shield is designed by someone doesn't quite know when, and it features the main points of what that village is. So if you've got a big windmill, have a windmill, and ours has got a white horse, which was one of the pubs. It's got a Ford tractor chugging away across there. It's got water meadows in the third shield, or a third little quadrant of this shield, and the fourth one is a roebuck's head.
Hmm.
And I always say that absolutely sums up Suffolk to me: is a water meadow, a tractor, a pub, and a roebuck. You know, a roebuck, they are part of our DNA here in Suffolk. And I think that you will never see any country Suffolk man or woman go and not go, he's a beautiful buck, when that goes across. He might have shot two of them the day before, but you still go, he's a lovely buck. But when he sees a muntjac, he'll go, bastard. And
Yeah.
and I would love to go and have that love and veneration of deer back again, but you ain't going to get that in East Anglia, because we've got some things that we bloody hate, a bit like that wonderful professor on Anglesey who's desperately trying to stem the flow of grey squirrels going in to go
Oh,
and
Craig. Yeah.
Craig. Yeah, we ought to get him
He'd
on
be a
one
few.
day.
I was about to say, he'd be a great future guest. Talk about
Oh,
squirrels
what a
swimming across
wonderful
the Menai Straits to.
what a wonderful man he is. Right, so anyway, listen, I've got some good news. We've got our next guest for February sorted.
Oh yes,
In
yes, a real
Yes,
person again. They're
a
always
A
better
real
than
real
person.
one?
Yeah, a real
again.
person. It's, do you know, the interesting thing about this one is so left field that most people will go, you what? Because he's an expert on reeds. Reeds.
Reeves.
Reeds, as
Oh,
in
Rachel.
Rachel
water
Reeves.
reed, not Rachel Reeves. No, God, no. No, he's not that awful. No, brilliant chap. He's an expert on thatching reeds, and the whole process of our management of this forgotten little piece of our beautiful jeweled and scepter dial is the water reeds of Britain, and that we used to use them for thatching, now we don't, and why the hell not? And he's an absolute genius on that. So therefore, it's got conservation, it's got thatching, and it's got also daring do of him being a royal engineer in Afghanistan.
Big fan of the Norfolk Reed. I'm just full
Fragile.
disclosure, it's my favourite, the Norfolk
Yeah,
Reed.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely number one. I won't
As a
have it.
Suffolk man, I agree with you.
If, dear listener, you're still here at the end of this podcast, then to be honest, I judge you. And I think you should have gone to do something else with your life. But if you are still here, thank you. Thank you for the support. Thank you for all the lovely comments we've had as well. And we've had a lot of support and a lot of sharing. And we've had some reviews as well, like this one. Easy listening, the thoroughly enjoyable ramblings of three knowledgeable country gentlemen, a bit like a young glass of the summer wine fueled by port. And that's from Emily Barr, who you can find
Ah,
on Instagram. And actually, Emily, I'm going to ask you now, can you come and be a guest on the show, please? So you can come and talk about
yes,
sheep
yes,
farming.
she's a really yes. I agree with you entirely. I
Yes.
think she would be very
Well, there's
interesting,
a whole year ahead yet. We're in a weird place with this where the podcast is probably doing better than any of us expected.
especially Kim Jong Un.
Well, quite. We seem to be big in Denmark as well now. And it's probably worth reminding everyone that we are really three idiots. We know about our things for work, but we're not really here at work. This is just us having a conversation. We are not necessarily the PR arm of anything we talk about. We are not the representatives of any of the worlds we come from. We are just having a conversation just as we do when we meet up in person. So
Yes.
if you have something that you'd like for us to talk about and it's a really serious topic, bear in mind that if you send in suggestions for us to talk seriously about that thing, there are going to be some knob gags in there and we
Mm.
are going to
Like
talk
Paul
about.
Tarquin when he wanted us to go and talk about the NGOs. Good God. I mean,
Yes,
I
that's
yeah.
think we did a reasonable job.
for by our standards, yes, but I think for everyone listening, it's sort of they're expecting the premier farming, field sports, rural
Oh, are they?
podcast, and
Are
Oh,
they?
how? Oh
well,
dear. How we
I,
disappointed them.
I'm setting expectations here.
Yeah.
We are
Lower them. Yeah.
shambolic. I mean, if you've not met us in person, then you really don't know
E-
what you're dealing
ex-
with.
Expect nothing, be blown away.
No, but if
That
you,
should be our that. Why don't you put that in the tagline of
it's
Yeah.
reverse.
everything we do?
CountrySlide. Don't get rid of that. The smear of Country Live to get CountrySlide. What was that thing you said? Expect nothing.
Expect nothing.
Yeah,
Expect nothing, be blown away.
be happy with what you get. It could have been worse.
Yeah. Could have been worse.
It
Yeah.
could have been
I'm
worse.
awfully sorry.
There,
Was
there's
that
worse.
me?
There's
Yeah.
worse things you can do with an hour and a half.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly. Right. Anyway, is that it?
we have We have links in our show notes. We have a Patreon account if you want to support us there. There's a little subscription thing, and it takes some money out of your bank account every month, a small amount, and we get that money and uh, we use it to do things like,
Farquhar,
well, we're going to try and. I want us to be on a
Chateau
big
Neuf de Pap.
stage somewhere at an event in the summer, doing this live, so people can see what we're really like and hear all the unedited bits as well.
Oh, I can organise that. I've already got one of those set up. Of more
Mm,
later. Yes, it'll be
more.
quite sort of prestigious. Don't you worry.
Do I have to wear a
Yeah,
cravat?
the Women's Institute's invited Richard back.
We also have a button there on the website, which is if you just want to give us a one-off payment, as people did last month. No, last week, even
Last week.
last week, and we will then use that to, I don't know, fund Richard's cigar habit or something like that.
Mm, mm.
Um, so we are the worst at PR. We are the worst at marketing, but still, people seem to be listening every week, and we really do appreciate you doing that.
Thank you, South Korea.
Thank you, South Korea. Thank you, South Norfolk.
We've
Yeah.
we've gone
What?
we've gone on. We really have to wrap this up. So
Okay.
I just I wanted to just think a final question, which was during my time in the swamp carrying this deer back, 100 kilos, so out of breath dragging this, mainly because my fitness is terrible. Such a hard thing to do. Even two of us really struggling. I thought to myself, this is probably a good question for you, Negus, is did humans really build the pyramids?
Well, of course they did. Honestly, you got these weirdos who have this bizarre notion that sort of there's something that came from outer space, right, from light years away, wasting their time. They'd have come down here and gone, "Oh my God, look, there's." No, they wouldn't have done. It's clearly obvious that the pyramids were built by human hand, much like hedges were, and much funnier.